I am constantly amazed at the number of institutions that are out there that are focused on this from a mission-driven point of view. Green banks, CDFIs, credit unions, heck, even your local banks with the right story can understand how this works.
I'm Carolyn Pars, communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a clean energy future without leaving anyone behind. Join me as we explore the technologies, policies, and human stories that could make clean energy not just sustainable for our planet, but accessible for everyone. What if the cheapest money to fund clean energy projects was also the money that unlocked equity for our communities? How about that? Today, we're going to dive into the promise of green banking and ESG financing. But before we do, I do have a quick ask for you. If you're listening to Just Power and getting value out of it, please hit the subscribe button. Subscribing will help us grow. It'll help us bring more people on our podcast and amplify the solutions that we bring to you every single week. Our goal is getting to 300 subscribers this season, and I'd love for you to help us do that. And if you're already subscribed, thank you from the bottom of my heart. But I also have an ask for you as well. Go ahead and share this with a friend or a colleague and ask them to subscribe. You probably know who that person is, right? So that would mean the world to us. So thank you so much. And with that, today I've invited on our show Walter Cuculic. He is a solar developer and a finance leader who has worked on over $1 billion of renewable energy projects across the USA. And he's also led solar lending at major banks and worked with leaders like Solar City, SunPower, and even Tesla. So he knows firsthand how green banking and ESG funding can change the game by providing access to low-cost capital while making clean energy more affordable for the people who need it most. And as you know, energy prices are going up. We're looking at 8 to 25%, and some states even higher. So this is going to be more important than ever. So welcome, Walter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. So glad to help out.
Awesome. So let's start off, if you can, just by breaking down, like, what is a green bank and how does it differ from traditional banking when it comes to financing clean energy and equity projects?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, the green banks have been around, probably about a dozen or so years. It's a new process that's come out. Green banks are basically public, sometimes private, quasi-private institutions that are usually mission-driven. They can be mission-driven around climate change. They could be mission-driven around sustainability issues, green building. They can have all different types of mission statements. I think at last count, I think there's over 40 green banks now in the U.S. You have
Nice.
gigantic ones like NYSERDA out of New York. You've got other regional ones or smaller ones, such as a green bank out of Colorado or Maryland or even Texas. Heck, oil country in Texas has a green bank as well.
Wow, right on. So this is a trend happening, right? Are there more and more green banks coming online? You said a little bit in our conversation before that maybe even be able to have access to a green bank that's in another state, right?
Yeah. A lot of green banks, because they're not in all geographies currently, some green banks will even work outside of their geographies. So just say you're
Okay.
in Wyoming and there's no green bank. Sometimes a green bank out of Colorado may be willing to do a project there, again, based on their mission. Sometimes a lot of green banks, I'd like to kind of differentiate. Sometimes they can be a source of free to low cost capital, but other times they're just a source of capital that's difficult to find.
Uh-huh.
NYSERDA early on, the Green Bank of New York, or I shouldn't say NYSERDA, they're two different things, but the Green Bank of New York used to do development loans. And so that
Hmm.
was a part of the capital stack that was difficult to finance. So that was an area that they kind of went in to change the marketplace a little bit.
Awesome. Okay, so why is that money, the Green Bank or equity project money, often cheaper? And what does that mean for utilities who are trying to scale those projects?
Yeah, so oftentimes it's cheaper because it's public funded, right? So oftentimes the cheapest source of capital is coming either from the federal government or the state government, right? Their borrowing costs are lower than private institutions. So that's where they get the lower cost of capital. Also, they might not have, if they're a mission driven bank, their purpose might be not necessarily about getting the best and highest return on their capital. It might
Right,
be to get, return their capital, but also have some either climate goals or some sustainability goals or equity goals that help. It's very similar to kind of how low income housing projects work. There's tax credits associated with low income housing. The federal government or even sometimes state governments determine that this is an investment or something that's worthwhile. And therefore, that's why there are different rates or different maybe credit policies or different missions related to those types of banks.
okay. All right. So with the federal cuts that we've seen and around, energy equity, how does that pan out for the green banks? You said states, right? I know states are
Yep.
really stepping up these days. Have you seen any ripple effects on that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there under the Inflation Reduction Act, there was
Yeah.
money allocated to a lot of sustainability or green financing, and unfortunately, that's either been some of it's been allocated and have gone out the door, some of it's already been pulled back, and then some of it is in the middle of lawsuits. Some of those funds were allocated to initiate or start some of these green banks. So I know either some of the state green banks or the state offices of energy or energy resiliency, they were awarded, I think it was over $7 billion, these green banks and
Wow.
state offices of energy. And a lot of that's currently held up in court. The EPA under the new administration was trying to, pull back those allocated funds, and then the states or the green banks were still trying to fight, that they still had access to those funds. So that's one of the areas I think
Yeah.
of, that's still out there. But that's at the federal level. States like I just referenced, they have their own pocketbooks, they have their own purse strings. They are still funding in states that care about or think that it's a
Okay.
area that they want to invest in. And that's where I think, at the federal level, if you believe in, renewable energy and that it's a good cause, the current administration felt, subsidies or tax credits associated with renewable energy for the most part were no longer needed. Or they wanted to direct those dollars elsewhere, right? But
Right.
that's where, Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, Texas, Colorado, those states that have started these green banks, and sometimes they're private ones. I live in Arizona full time, and Arizona has a small state, and I think it's a privately funded green bank.
Okay.
So there are, and then in addition to green banks, the other thing that I would look into is there's a lot of what I call for purpose lenders, right? And that's private money, either nonprofits or institutional capital that is putting money out the door to fund,
Hmm.
renewable energy or greenhouse gas emission reduction projects.
That's
Um,
fantastic. I didn't know
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great one's called I'll take a little example and do a shout out. It's called SELF, SELF, Solar
Mhm.
Energy Loan Fund. And it's a CDFI, a Community Development Finance Institution.
Nice.
Yep, and so that's also in addition to green banks, I would definitely look at those Community Development Finance Institutions,
Yeah, we'll
CDFIs.
put that in our show notes. I love it.
Yep,
I'm happy to do shout outs for to great things like that. So,
yep,
because I read today that nearly $19 billion of renewable energy projects were canceled, according to the Financial Times. So that's got
yep.
to have an impact. I mean, those are maybe they were canceled. I know there's been a lot of worry, there's been a lot of speculation and wondering, where we're at. So this has been happening,
Yeah.
the ripple effect. But what I'm hearing you say is these resources that are happening for some of those projects, right? And not all is lost, that you might have to
Yep.
just get creative and go beyond, what we're thinking about federal funds these days.
Yeah, definitely. And in addition to, I mean, that's where I think, states are gonna, if we as a society or states believe that, this is a issue that they want to tackle, then, it's an area that, states that often states have what they have called REC or SREC programs or markets. And that's where if you're a polluter and you're polluting a certain amount of carbon emissions or however they determine greenhouse gas emissions, then you have to buy these SRECs. And those are
Hmm.
another way to subsidize or finance renewable energy projects as well. So,
Okay. Even though we have what's happening right now in our country, there's always ESG investors, right? They're
yep,
they're often, investing in utilities, making their voices known through that. And
yep,
investors, or I say utilities and energy providers, realize that a certain percentage are it's that kind of investor, right? So what do they look for, right? Let's call it the ESG investor, the environmental social governance investor. What do they look at when they're evaluating a clean energy equity project? And how
yeah.
can utilities position their initiatives to attract this kind of investor and capital?
Yeah, I like a term that kind of fits in it is called the triple bottom line. It's probably a term that a lot of your audience may have heard of or maybe not. In traditional accounting or in traditional finance, you talk about, all right, what's the bottom line, right? That
Yeah,
typically means the financial bottom line. Well, the triple bottom line kind of expands that thought process or that language where it's not just the financial aspect, right? In order for a fund, an investor, a bank, or whoever it is to be sustainable, it needs to be sustainable, I believe, in three ways. And that's where the triple bottom line
right,
comes into it. It needs to be financially sustainable. If you're giving away money and never get it back, that's not financially sustainable. Right. So these
right.
banks have to, whether it's a green bank or a CDFI, if it wants to be sustainable and financially sustainable, it's got to make good loans to good borrowers to good projects that pay those loans back. So it's got to be, so that's the number one thing. If you don't
Okay.
have a way to finance the project, then that's the first thing I would say that they look at. You have to have your story. The second aspect that I like to say is of the triple bottom line is the sustainability or the environment, however you want
Hmm.
to classify the impact on the world in which we live. Is it a good impact? If you're a lumber company and you just cut down all your trees and you don't replant your trees, then you're not going to be a sustainable lumber company because when you've cut down all your trees on your land, there's going to be no new trees to cut down. So
Right.
that's kind of the same thing. If we pollute our water, pollute our air, whatever it is, then are we going to have a sustainable or livable planet? And then the
To-
last one is how you treat the third leg of the triple bottom line is people. Are you paying fair wages? Are you treating people humanely? Are there work conditions in a position where people are going to want to continue to go work there? Those are all kind of the aspects of that triple bottom line. As a short term of it, it's often referred to as people, profit, planet, right? So you got to take care of your people. You got to take care of you got to make sure you're making money and you got to make sure you're taking care of the planet, or that you're being sustainable. If you're cutting down trees, let's replant them, or whatever it ends
Yes.
up being. So,
Yeah, it's so often, on the triple bottom line, those companies that really follow that often are more profitable because of
yeah,
there's less risk when it comes to that, right? So, of course, the profit part is very important in the business environment, but when those other aspects are part of their story, part of their business model, those companies very often are making more money. So
yep,
that's a good thing, right? So check that out. And those ESG investors know that, and they push, often the utilities. And here's a little anecdotal story. A colleague of mine who's a VP of sustainability at a major utility, right? Was in her office, and a Goldman Sachs, right, exec came in, and instead of asking her, hey, how is your decarbonization plan going? He asked, what are you doing on just transition, for your just transition plan? Right? Which was kind of surprising because that's back to that people, planet, profit, right? That's the people
yep,
part, right?
yep.
That they're being asked. So I thought that was like a good heads up that it's actually an investor realm, because it's important because they make money there, right?
Yep.
So all right. So we know ESG investors and why that's important. So I want to just shift to like green bonds. Like what are those? And because they're gaining traction. And so what are they, and how can utilities leverage them to fund, let's say, equity focused projects?
Yeah, so a green bond is just like almost any other bond that's out there again, but it's targeted toward a specific asset class, right? Again, it's generally dealing with some type of sustainability issue, or some, energy efficiency, energy issue, or something of those sorts. So green bonds, they're ways to fund what I would consider portfolios of assets. So if you're a lender and you give one project a loan, and that project gets hit by a hurricane or hail or some natural disaster, or for some reason fails, you have a catastrophic failure. Um,
Hmm.
Under a bond portfolio, or what they call sometimes, these are mortgage-backed securities, right? Is another MBSs, is very similar to bonds, is that you'll have a similar type of deal where you basically aggregate, or you can aggregate projects together. Now, the difference from the bond is sometimes bonds can be funded at the municipal level. So you can have either corporate bonds or individual bonds. Corporate bonds, again, if were doing a project with a city or municipality, that might be a municipal green bond. Or if it's
Okay.
a private company, all it is the difference I'd say between private debt and the bond market is bonds are typically larger in size. You're not going to necessarily do maybe a million or smaller bonds. So just because of the cost in the administration to set up a bond, that's probably some of the reason for the additional
Okay.
cost.
That's why we see utilities taking advantage of those green bonds when they're doing a big
Yep.
project, a
Yep.
large scale project.
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's also something called, again, bonds are a little bit unique or nuanced because that you can't do them necessarily. All municipalities or all entities aren't, they're not readily available. It's very similar to PACE or CPACE, commercial PACE. That's something called property assessment clean energy. And that's another way to finance. It's basically a real estate tax or a property tax that can be used to fund renewable energy or clean energy or sustainability or energy efficiency projects.
All right. Wow. Okay, you know your stuff there, Walter. So with rural electric co-ops and
Yep.
even the U.S. territories, American Samoa, right? Tell us a little
Yep.
bit
In Puerto
about
Rico.
that
Yeah.
and how. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that project that you worked on.
Yeah. In addition to your green banks, your CDFIs, we talked about bonds, or we talked about mortgage-backed securities. Um, there's some government guaranteed loans that are very conducive for renewable energy projects. One of the loans that I've used quite a bit is one called a U.S. Department of Agriculture loan. and it's called Rural Energy for America. I want to say it's
Mm.
been around for about 17 years. Um, and you can get loans up to $25 million under the Rural Energy for America program. And most banks will do these USDA loans. And then there's even some private lenders that will do these USDA loans as well. And the reason that these USDA loans are nice is they give you longer term amortization. They sometimes will give you fixed fees or fixed cost. And depending on the project, it could be lower
Mm.
cost of capital because they come with a USDA guarantee. And so, sometimes the lenders will take on more risk because they can be guaranteed by the government. So that's a loan program that I would encourage if you're working in a rural area.
Okay.
The USDA Rural Energy for America program. And then there's a sister program which has been around for even longer, and can be used for, in addition to energy, it could also be used for energy storage or battery projects. It's called USDA Business and Industry. So those are both projects or loans, and they both can go up to $25 million in size.
Nice. Right. Okay. So how did these, projects translate into like tangible affordability benefits for people, households, like
Yeah.
lower bills or reduced upfront costs? How does it like all that actually have an impact on that person that's flipping on the switch?
Yeah. I'd say the big thing is, and, now prior to the tax credit, I could confidently say in something like 80% of the US, with the right financing and the right strategies, there was a what I call a economic benefit to renewable energy. Now, after the tax credits, I don't know if it's still 80%, it might be 60%. It kind of depends on the cost of power, how much energy it costs, I mean, how much energy the system produces, and then what the cost to install that system is. And that's kind of the equation that everybody kind of does is, okay, what is the cost to build it? What is my borrowing cost to build that, right? Because you either finance it through, sometimes you'll finance it through a loan, sometimes you'll finance it through a PPA. But if I am
Mm.
sorry, I didn't ask this prior, Carolyn. Do most of your audience know what a PPA is, a power purchase agreement?
Go ahead and say it just in case
Okay,
there's someone that
no
doesn't.
problem. So there's two ways to finance solar projects traditionally, or renewable energy projects. One way is you kind of buy the energy, and that would traditionally be in the form of a contract. Those contracts are called power purchases agreements. A homeowner could enter into a power purchase agreement, a commercial business, a school, a city, or even Google could enter into a power purchase agreement. Sometimes you call
Hmm.
them different things. Sometimes they might be called an equipment lease or a energy services agreement or a solar lease. But under all of those structures, you're basically buying power from somebody else. Somebody else owns the equipment, somebody else maintains it and sells you electricity. Well, under those scenarios, it's very easy. Is the person that's selling me electricity more or less expensive than the grid? If the grid's more expensive than that third party, then it's a very easy economic question, right? Now, we don't now
Right.
that usually the PPAs give you a fixed rate day one, and then they come with an escalator. That escalator might be zero, could be 5%. It all depends on the market, the person that's selling you electricity, all of those things. Now, the utility, he doesn't tell you what he's going to raise his rates year, 1 year to the next, right? Or you only know
Yes.
maybe 2 years in advance. Those PPAs that you sign with third party owners, they are typically 20 to 30-year agreements, and they're very called out. So it'll tell you, I'm increasing you at 1.5% a year for the next 30 years. The utility, there's risk. Some years it might be zero, some years it might be four, some years it might be six. It
Mm.
varies, right? So that's the difference where you might go, okay, I'm going to take a PPA rate that's at or near what I'm currently paying for electricity. Maybe it's a little bit below, but then it's really a question of how much does your PPA rate go against that one. So that's easy to understand. If you want to buy it and own it, then it's a similar type of calculation where the cost you're going to own this. So you have to look at the depreciation benefits, any tax credits or benefits to reduce that upfront cost or ongoing cost. And then ideally, you're either paying for cash and then you determine what's my value of that cash that I'm buying the system in, or I'm borrowing money to buy the system. If I'm borrowing money, then is my borrowing cost or is that monthly mortgage payment higher or lower than my utility costs that I'm now offsetting? And so that's kind of how people should be looking
Yeah.
at it from an individual standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to do
Yeah.
just a pivot here. I want to ask you about just the whole idea of the energy equity and how some utilities see it as a compliance, right? Uh,
Yeah.
Driven versus business or opportunity driven. So, how
Yeah.
does green financing actually create business growth, right? Opportunities for utilities. How is that part of that
Yeah.
story?
Well, one area that I would say that kind of focuses on or that utilities are doing is something they call community solar, right? So if I'm living in a state or a market and I can put solar on my house or on my building, then I have a benefit for that project, right? I'm now saving money, ideally because I put solar on my building or my house. And so that's benefiting me. Now, there might be some additional benefits to the grid or society by me putting solar on my house. But what if I live in an apartment and I can't put solar on my house? Or what if I live in a
Yes,
house
totally. Or you're
and
renting, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm renting, or I have a house and there's a gigantic tree that shades my roof, or whatever the reason is. So that's an area where utilities and states have created or are creating community solar programs. And that's where individuals or businesses or even cities or municipalities can buy
Hmm.
into a community solar project. And now they are not owning, well, I shouldn't say that always. The majority of cases, they still don't own that solar, but they get a discount by participating in that community solar program. And so I think over
Right.
20, maybe 25 states now have community solar programs. And so if you're a utility or a
Okay. So this,
co-op, that might be something that you want to consider.
yeah. And it's a way for, like you said, for people who don't have a house or they're renting or it's just a big expense,
Yep.
upfront cost expense that they can enjoy, right, the benefits of clean energy without having it on their roof. So,
Yeah, it's very
and that
similar to
that's an
the
equity.
exactly. Yeah, and I think the thing is that sometimes that the only people that can get solar are the rich people with the big houses and they're saving money, but then the low to moderate income that are either renting or living in apartments or renting houses, they can't save money by having solar. So that's kind of one of the ways they deal with that energy equity program.
Yeah, love that. All right. So, in beginning to wrap up here, if you can give a utility executive like one piece of advice about using green banking or ESG capital to finance equity projects in the next 5 years, what would you say? What would it
Yeah,
be?
I mean, do your homework. I've been in renewable energy since around 2006, 2007. So, around 18 years. I've been a developer. I've been a financer. I've dealt with tax equity. There, you'll keep turning over rocks and do your homework. There's lots. I am constantly amazed at the number of institutions that are out there that are focused on this from a mission driven point of view. And so, either green banks, CDFIs, credit unions, heck, even your local bank sometimes with the right story can understand how this works. And I've worked for both CDFIs, banks, as well as private lenders. And the thing I can tell you is, renewable energy works. It's not, in terms of it produces value, it produces income and can pay bills. I've been on the debt side and I've seen these projects work and they pay off their debts. So
All right.
very low risk. And so I definitely encourage you to keep looking and turning over rocks and doing your homework. So
Yeah, yeah. And maybe one of those homework assignments is to get in touch with you. How do people get in touch with you? If they even thinking about, especially mission driven, where they
yeah.
may not be up on all of what you've just laid out for us.
No
Um,
problem.
how
Yeah,
do they get to you?
I have a profile on LinkedIn with a couple of my consulting companies up there.
Okay.
And my email is very easy. It's just my first name dot my last name at gmail.com. So,
Nice. And we'll have
yeah,
that in the show notes. We'll have your LinkedIn there for you.
okay.
So thank you so much
Yeah,
for laying that out. I've learned a lot
yeah.
here today on the whole. I'm excited about the green banking part. It makes more things possible for those that perhaps wouldn't be able to, like, we're all about clean energy for everyone here. So I love what you laid out for us because we're going to
Definitely.
hit,
And one more piece of advice I give.
sure.
Yeah, one more piece of advice I throw out there is if the bank or the energy office or the CDFI doesn't have what you're looking for, ask them. These people are
Mm.
they're mission driven, so they're trying to be, and so don't hesitate to ask or suggest a new system that they might not have done before. So it's something else I would suggest.
Nice. You could be a catalyst for something in your town or your city or your state. So
Yep.
right on. We're gonna hit some rough waters, like I said at the beginning, when it comes to energy affordability and access, with higher costs coming down the pike. Sorry to say that is happening. It's going to leave the people that are more vulnerable even, more vulnerable. Okay, so that's an important piece. So everyone has to get involved here. And I know that if you're listening to this, right, you're and hopefully you've looked at our other shows or listened to our other shows. Keep on coming back and do subscribe, right? Do subscribe and continue. I'll continue to bring on great guests like we have with Walter, who are really leading the way on creating a clean energy future that leaves no one behind, because we are all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.